Hi, Rob.
Hi, Rob.
Nice to see you again.
Hey, Richard. Nice to see you again.
Yeah.
It's been a hectic couple of weeks, vacation and everything like that. It's hectic trying to relax for some reason.
Yeah, definitely. I know the feeling. So I suppose we should start with our nice code of conduct. So let me just bring that up on the screen. Do you want to read it out, Rob?
Well, yeah, sure. We have a code of conduct, and they're pretty simple, really. It's basically, be friendly and patient, be aware of others, welcome and respectful, open to all questions and viewpoints, be understanding of differences, and be kind and considerate to others. And like I usually say, just don't be a D word. And it all solves itself, basically.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely agree with that. So I guess everyone's here to see Daniel, so let's bring him in. Hi, Daniel.
Good evening. Hi.
Good evening.
Right. So I guess we'll leave you to it, and we'll see you at the end for questions.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into this meetup. I like to start with a few. So I can't see you, right? But I do like to ask you a couple of questions. Please answer them in the chat if you can, because I like to know what you're doing on a daily basis. Are you more a developer person, or are you more, an operations person, or are you even a DevOps person? And yes, that was a joke. I do consultancy work, and in that type of work, I visit a lot of different customers to help them with code or with operations. I do a bit of both, and I see myself as a DevOps person. And while I do that, each time I join a new team, I have to make sure that I change the way I work. I have to use a different kind of code, a different kind of Node.js, a different version, stuff like that. And each time that takes me a lot of time. So in this presentation, I'm going to show you a way where we can optimize that and make sure that when a new person joins your team, they can be active from day one, right away. And I'm going to do that with GitHub Codespaces. So a little bit about me. I am Daniel Paulus, and I'm an Azure MVP, and I work on a day-by-day basis as a consultant for Bright Blue, a Dutch consultancy firm. You can find me on Twitter as PaulusTM. Please let me know that you're watching. Send me all your feedback. My DMs are open. I want to learn every day, so please let me know how I can improve or what you want to ask me after this presentation. At the end of this presentation, there's also room for questions, so please leave them in the chat, and we will get back to you. So what we're going to talk about. First, I'd like to talk with you about what is a developer workflow, because without that workflow, what are we even solving, right? I talked a lot already about Codespaces, so then we zoom in. What is this Codespaces thing even? But I can show you slides, but I can better show you a demo, right? So in a demo, I am going to show you what you can do with Codespaces and how that enables you to go faster. After the demo, you want to know more, I know for sure. So I will show you how you can get it, what you need to do, and how you can get started. After that, we have room for questions. I will not take your entire evening today. I think I will be done in 35-ish minutes. So we have plenty of room for questions. So let's talk about the workflow. Every time when I join a new team, these are the steps that I have to jump through in order to get something into production. The first phase is the setup phase. I need to make sure that I use the correct version of Terraform. I have the correct version of Node.js. Maybe they use an old version of .NET or a different version than I have installed on my local machine. It depends on the level of the documentation of the customer, how fast this phase is, right? It can be 1 hour, but it can also take days to figure out every nitty-bitty thing that I have to tweak in order to get it working. Then I finally can do the actual develop work. That speaks for itself. It's just writing some lines of code, and should be straightforward. But if I'm done with that and I want to run the test, then I once again have to fall back to the documentation that is available or isn't, because there's lots of testing frameworks. I might need to have a database up and running, or maybe a local Redis or anything like that. And again, depending on how good the documentation is, that might take a while to figure out and might lead to failing tests that actually are not failing, but failing because I don't have certain things installed. If the testing is done and I'm ready to move to the next stage, we go to the integration phase. I'm gonna check if there is an environment where I can deploy my code to let other people check it, right? Kind of like a Q&A phase. That might be automated with CI/CD, but might also be different. So depending on documentation, again here, that might take a while to get working. After that, we go to the optimization phase. They might use a SonarQube or any other kind of scanning tools. Again, depending on, do I have them installed on my system, or do I need to use the CLI or anything? Is there a CI/CD available? Stuff like that. Depending on the documentation, it might take a moment to figure out. Hopefully, if that's all done and my PR is ready and reviewed, we can deploy to production, and hopefully that phase is fully automated, depending on the customer. So let's have a look at what this Codespaces thing is, right? It's a VS Code in your browser, and that's amazing. You can simply work from your own web browser, wherever you are, in a VS Code environment hosted by GitHub. So the compute is available by them. It has the full EDE environment that you're used to. It does everything that you expect it to do, including debugging, but it has syntax highlighting, auto-completion. You can pre-install plugins. So if your team says, we want to use this set of plugins, let's go make sure that it's pre-installed. And the best part, the configuration is included in the repo. So no discussions anymore about spaces or tabs. If I want to have 2 spaces or 4 spaces or anything like that, it's all included in the configuration in the application repo. So different teams might have different configuration as long as it's a team thing, right? And it's shared. So as soon as I say, well, we're now using spaces, but let's use tabs, it's changed for everyone. Everyone is using the same configuration. And we can develop from everywhere. I've used this on my iPad, in a train, while on a modem. It worked fine-ish, right? It's not a super experience because of the bitrate, but I was able to solve a bug and make a PR to production from an iPad in a train. I still think it's amazing. But let's stop talking and let's start showing, right? Hello, Inception. This is GitHub. Let me zoom in a little bit. I hope that you all know how GitHub works. This is your repo, and I've made a testing / demo to show you how Codespaces works. You can, instead of clone it to your local workstation, we can go to the Codespaces tab and say, okay, let's create a Codespace. It takes a moment. It sets up everything. It has some fancy logging for you, like it's building the container where we run in, and it then connects It always takes long if you wait for it. But here we are. Let me zoom in a bit so you all can see. So we get a welcome greeting and a bunch of pop-ups that I don't need right now, which says that you are now on the default image. It includes with a bunch of tools, and there's an entire README with all the stuff that is included in the default workspace, which you can check out by going to this link, the default image. But for now, let's show you that we have Node.js available. And the downside is this has Node.js 16, which is the version that you should use. But my example repo uses Node.js 14. So I have to downgrade. That real quick. Wait, made a mistake. We're now on 14. So this is the setup phase, right? This is already like a few minutes work in order to get this all set up. And now I want to do some work on the API. So let's jump into the API. This is a functions app. So that is also made in Node.js. So let's make sure to install everything that we need. And now start the API. And all of a sudden, you see we have another issue. We don't have the function runtime yet. So we need to make sure that I also install the functions runtime. And because I always make typos, I copy paste this from my notes. And as you can see, we're in a data center, right? This is in the GitHub DC. So the install speed that we get is of fiber optics. It's downloading really fast, and that saves us time. We now have what we need to, so let's start again. And now you see that the function is actually starting. And all of a sudden we get this notification that there is a host exposed, a port exposed. And this is kind of strange because how can I expose a local host while I'm in a cloud instance in a GitHub DC? How does that work, exposing local host, right? Well, there's a magic trick in the background where if we go to that, this is always nice with live demos. I checked this like not even half an hour ago and it worked great then. All right, let's try again. someone sees what I'm doing wrong, please let me know in the chat. Now let's move on to the next part, which will probably also not work. But we also have a view app, and a view app has way more dependencies. So this once again shows you the speed that we get from a GitHub Codespace instead of having your local data, which might be not as fast as this line is. So you see that we installed 1,412 packages in less than 24 seconds, which I think is a nice speed for such amount of node packages. Let's see if we can get this to work. A sec to get everything built. All right, this is good. So the problem is some here. Okay. I've changed nothing, and now all of a sudden this works. Live demos, people. Things happen. So as you can see, I can now see the output of the API call right in my browser, because the local host endpoint has been updated by Codespaces to use the Codespaces URI, and then it has an append of the port. So I can give this endpoint to anyone within my organization, and they can see this endpoint. They can check this as well. And especially for the front-end application, I broke the images. We'll fix that later. But as you can see, I can give this endpoint to anyone in my organization and ask them to check this endpoint. So the integration phase has been done with this. I can give this to a designer and ask him, like, is this okay? Is this change what you meant? Or do I need to change anything else? We can also update this. If we go to ports, you can see now that the visibility is set to private, but we can update this to public. If I change this to public, everybody can see this. It's just open, so you don't need to have a GitHub account anymore. If you have it set to private, you need to have a GitHub account and you need to be part of my organization in order to see this. So you can go to this endpoint, you won't see anything there. You will just get I guess it's a 500 or 404, not sure. But we're now still in our browser. Let me close this. And you might want to use your own local VS Code. We can do that as well. So let's go to VS Code. And we then have the option to connect to a code space. Let's do that. I'm already authenticated with my GitHub account, so therefore it already knows who I am. If you're not, it will first ask you to authenticate to GitHub and then check if there are any code spaces in your account that run right now. So let's take this code space. And as you will see in the bottom left, says it is connected to a code space right now. And at this point, I have the exact same setup as the code space. There's no local checkout. There's no code on my local machine. And if I open up the terminal, you will also see that I'm still connected to the code spaces. And at this moment, the ports are still exposed because we are still running. So let's check that by going to the API endpoint. As you see, okay, let me do a copy paste again. As you can see, we now actually connect to localhost, but it's a transparent proxy, right? So for me, I go to localhost, but what it actually does, it goes underwater and connects to a secure way to my code space that it is running in a data center of GitHub. And still for me, it's just localhost. So if I have other applications running that connect to localhost in order to fetch data or anything, they will just work because for them, localhost is just localhost. And we can also go to this endpoint and we see exact same thing as we expected to see, right? But one of the things that we had to do in order to get here is we had to install a bunch of things. We had to downgrade Node.js. We had to install packages. We had to install the functions runtime. But all of that takes time. And I want to make sure that as soon as a new team member gets in the team, all that stuff is not on his plate anymore. He just starts it up, runs npm install, and runs npm start, and is ready to go. That's where I want to be. So in order to get there, we have another thing called dev containers. And dev containers are a way to have a pre-installed container ready to go for your application. So we can search dev containers. And there's a bunch of dev containers out there. It's an open source thing from Microsoft. I will share the link afterwards. You can just go there, make a PR for your container or the runtime that you are missing, and you can make your own definition and make sure that your container is available as well. To give you an ID, we have Node.js, but we have also MongoDB, Postgres, TypeScript. There's a bunch of show all descriptions. I even saw Salesforce, Azure stuff. So as you can see, there's really a lot of pre-made stuff out there, and you can find the container that most fits your environment. So I want to use functions, and I want to use the Node.js and Azure Functions. So let's take this one. And what you now see is that it has made two files, right? It has made a dev container.json file and a Docker file. The Docker file is extremely simple. It will just pull a basic or a known upstream functions container, and it specifies here that the version is 14. In the dev container, we can override it to 16, but as I said, we still run on 14, so let's keep with 14. We can already set up ports that we like to forward, but the most important thing is we can preload extensions. So as it's an Azure Functions extension, why not install the Azure Functions extension already? And it also has a linter involved. But if I want to use a different extension, I can add it here and it will be installed. What you can do, but I don't really like it, is enable a post startup thing to install npm packages already. So on the start of the container, it will also install the packages that you need. The downside here is it will wait until this is finished. So if you have a large install, that might take a while. So that's why I want to do it by hand afterwards. And we can specify as which user we run. When this is done, let's add the dev container to it. And I'm now gonna stop current code space. And now we're back in GitHub. We don't need this anymore. So let me remove the code space, because now we have a dev container setup. So let's create a new code space. And what you now will see is that it detects the code space and it builds the container. So this stage will take a little bit longer and will also give output. Let me view the logs. So you now see that it is pulling in the base container. We don't install any extra packages, but we could do that if we need specific tools or specific build tools. We can add that to the Dockerfile and it will be built in this phase. So as you see, it will take a little bit longer to get set up. It's done. Now it is making sure that we have the plugins. So if I now check here, we now have the linting tool installed. We now have the linting tool installed and the functions account plugin, which also installs the Azure account plugin. But the most important thing, let me zoom in a bit, is we now have Node.js 14. So if I now go to API and I say npm install and npm start, we also have the runtime, so it immediately starts the API for us. And let's go to, and voila, we instantly have the API output without the need that I have to install anything. It was just bam, 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 done. I think this is extremely powerful. And we also have this other interesting thing, because right now I'm in GitHub, right? And you saw that I just used the Codespace, and the Codespace has compute. But if I just want to have a editor, because I want to install a simple file, for example, a documentation file, or I want to see all the open PRs on my repo and I want to go through it and merge them, see what they change and stuff like that, I can go to github.dev in my repo, and all of a sudden I have a VS Code editor that gives me the GitHub plugin, for which I can see like what is open, what is closed, what is assigned to me. I don't have any open tickets here, but you will see them here. You can go through them, or you can say, well, let's change something here and make a text PR without the need for any compute. So instead of having a full-fledged code space, I can have a simple environment without compute by going to github.dev. With that, the demo is done. So you would like to get started with this, right? It's super interesting, and you think that your team can evolve with this. Then you need to have GitHub Teams or GitHub Enterprise in order to get started with Codespaces. If you were a member of the beta test, you can have a Codespace on your personal account. But if you want to use it as a team, you need GitHub Teams or GitHub Enterprise. You then have options when it comes to the compute. You can use a 2-core with 4 gigabytes of RAM, all the way up to 32 with 64 gigabytes of RAM. And you can see that the price goes up, of course. If your Codespace is not running, so it's inactive, and you simply leave it there, you pay for the storage that you use per gigabyte. So as you can see, that's not very expensive, but you can also say, let's delete the Codespace and I will make a new one when I need a new Codespace. This saves you the need to do an npm install every time, but if you don't have a very large environment, you might just throw it away and make a new one. With this, I think we're up for questions. So let me know if there are any, and hopefully I can answer them for you.
Hello. That was awesome. I was having a little play along myself with my Codespaces and trying to get PowerShell and stuff to install, because I noticed you had your terminal up. So my question would be, can I do stuff like my posh inside this dev container so I have my nice fancy terminal when I start it up, so I'm used to it? And
yeah. So what you can do is you can make your own dot files. I haven't done that yet, but it's definitely on my things to do list. Because if you make dot files in your GitHub environment, it will see them, it will load them into the Codespace, and it will activate that in your terminal, right? So there are things that you can't do because you cannot load a plugin from your dot files yet. So if you want to have a certain plugin in Codespaces, that's not for your entire team, you have to install that afterwards. Because they can't pick that up yet from your dot files, but that's things that they are working on. But if you want to use Oh My Porsche or ZSH or stuff like that, or Fish, whatever you want to use, you can do that with dot files, and that is possible. Yes.
Awesome. That's cool. Yeah. So another question, is this designed more for the developers, or do you think the IT ops people, sort of DevOpsy people, are going to make usage of this? Or where do you see this sort of, whereabouts do you see this product to be?
I see this on a lot of different teams. Like if you have a larger organization and there is a DevRel team, right? They might write documentation. They can now very easily start up a code space, all set up with tooling for Markdown, and everybody can jump in, make some edits there, just start up a code space, have everything ready to go, and they're done, right? They can run the tests without the need of installing all those parsing tools and checking tools on their local system. If you look at DevOps teams, they might write code like Node.js or Java or anything, but they also do infrastructure as code with a Terraform setup or what have we, right? So by having a repo with all the tools included and a container with the tools included, it makes everyone able to quickly jump in, make some modifications, test everything, and commit back. And then, of course, there's an CI/CD tool that checks if everything is okay. But where I see this going is internal PRs to different teams from team members that want to have a specific thing where they used to have made a ticket for the other team. They can now start a code space, write that stuff in there, and commit, done, without the need of installing that entire setup on their local system. So I think it's for everyone.
It by far makes it easier for teams just to collaborate like quickly, and it's all built on dev containers, which I think is really cool because it's you could reuse it locally if you want. It's the same type of setup. It just happens to then run in GitHub Codespaces, which is also cool. So I usually tell people to look into dev containers anyway.
Yes,
so
if you don't want to go to GitHub just yet, if you don't want to use the Codespaces just yet, just use the dev containers and make sure that you are ready for a code space or another tool. Because if you have the dev containers ready to go, I can simply connect to that dev container. I do need Docker though, so I do need a bit of heavier laptop, and with a code space, I can give anyone in my company like a office laptop. Yep. They don't need developer laptops, right? Because the computer's in the cloud, so I can give everyone the same simple laptop, and then give the developers that need it a heavier code space. And on that way, I can make sure that they still have the dev experience, but I don't need to spend the money on the laptops. So if I'm a startup and I don't have lots of funding yet, I can still do fancy stuff.
And you can have everything at the ready. So even when like onboarding, you really don't need anything. Like you can start in your browser even if you wanted to. Obviously, getting to your local VS Code and everything like that is probably better in the end. But you can do a lot with this, and I really look forward to using Codespaces more. I've used dev containers a lot. We use that with different clients. it's cool to just, I can jump into a certain client project and then have the environment that actually is for that client project.
Yeah.
At the ready. Yeah. And it's the same here. We're doing stuff with GitHub. We're creating this dev container like definitions and configurations already. Now we just need to say, all right, let's run it in the cloud, and then everyone just gets it. And we actually we did some with documentation, because we used a documentation tool that creates some static documentation based on Markdown, and that required Python, etc., etc., etc. And like just opening that up to anyone would require us to tell them, by the way, you also need Python, and you also need to download this thing, and you need to do this, and etc., etc.
Yeah.
By having it ready, we literally just like you open up, the terminal spins up, and then you run these commands to generate new versions when you're done, and you can check it out if it works as intended or not. You don't have to do anything; it's all ready. So
it's already there, yeah. And everyone has the same environment and the same configuration. So you don't have, like, things that I've seen is lots of changes in a PR, but that was just going from a tab to spaces, or from two spaces to a tab. And because we now have the configuration of VS Code in the repo, everyone has the same configuration. And that also makes that you don't make autosave issues anymore, because everyone has the same config. And you can, of course, extend your own config with your own plugins and your own themes and stuff like that. But the basics are there, and everybody is on the same page with the basics. And I think that's really great, especially if your team is not all in the same room, and they are all scattered around the globe, or even like on certain places, different time zones and such. Having the configuration in one place makes sure that everyone always works in the same configuration. So if I change that configuration, the next time that somebody spins up the code space or the dev container, they have that change. And there's no like, well, what did you do? Because they can see what I changed. And I think that's really cool.
Definitely. So I'm guessing someone needs to be responsible for keeping the dev container or the configuration up to date. And do you see that as a collection of people, or or is it just one team that just keeps it up to date and pushes the changes, and then everyone picks up it all? Or is it like you have
see
sort
that
of cab
as a
meetings?
team
Yeah.
Right? Because as a team, you work in a code space with certain settings, and if someone sees the need to upgrade to Node.js 16, you need to upgrade your dev environment as well, right? So all of a sudden, there is a PR to the repo which updates the dev container to, instead of 14, use 16. And that might include a bunch of changes to the NPM packages as well, because that's the reason why I still use 14. I'm not fully up to date to go to 16 right now. So as soon as someone updates the packages and we are ready to go to 16, it's just one PR that has to be made to the dev container in order to upgrade us to 16. So
yeah, that's also one of the great things, that you have like per repository potentially different environments based on what you actually need for that particular application. So like when writing Go or well, Node or anything that has this like potential breaking changes or big changes or something like that, like at some point, version 1.18 in Go is not the same as 1.17. There's completely different stuff happening there. Some projects might need to keep that old version, but you can move on in different, and have the same environment but different versions depending on what you actually need.
And I see a lot that teams use different versions. They didn't have the time to upgrade yet, or they don't see the need yet to upgrade, or there's a bunch of different things that might be in play. There might even be teams that say, well, for us, this framework works better than the other framework. So we want to use that, or we want to use an entire different language, which now is way easier because they build their own container, which also can be used by the operations people to host their applications, right? So while the example that I showed you uses a open source dev container, I would say make sure to build your own container that you also would use in production, and then use that container as your go-to dev container, which you might extend with dev packages and such. But make sure that you are on the same page as your production environment.
Yeah, so sort of like with that multi-stage Docker build, you're thinking use your base build that you're using to build your app as your dev container. Okay, I like that idea. That helps keep it all up to date and everything as well. So that's
I would even say that in some aspects, for instance, if you're creating an API and that needs to be in a container and then you're going to host it in whatever, you could just use the image that you would actually have that application running on, but the entire thing, and that's where you do your development. And obviously, when you build it for when actually in the deployment, you don't bring in the things that you would use in your container when you're working, like if you're doing fish or something like that. Like, don't take in like that extra, but it would be the same start, and it would be on the same thing. You just add some dev tools on top when you're doing development, but it would be the same image.
Yep. And that's the fun thing that a Codespace does, is you can link your dot files. So when it starts with the Codespace and you do use fish, it will make sure that your environment in the Codespace has fish as well. But if you work in a dev container, you cannot do that trick, or at least I haven't figured it out yet. So I simply use bash in my dev container. While in my Codespace, I can use the dot files automatically linked, which I think is a nice feature of Codespaces.
I think you can do that with dev containers with Docker locally, but as soon as you have Docker locally, you have to do a lot of things to make everything work with each other. While in Codespace, just like if you reach out to the internet, then you're done, more or less.
Yeah. And I also would really like to see where this is going in the education, right? Because if I'm now in school and I want to learn a new environment or a new language or anything, I can have a Codespace, which for the entire room is the same Codespace. We are all on the same page. We're all in the same environment. And then the teacher has a single point to start. They know that all the environments are the same. They don't need to do any debugging with Windows or Mac or anything. It's all the same environment. So the getting started phase will be way easier. And they don't need heavy-duty laptops. They can use a Chromebook to get started, which I think in a teaching environment is awesome.
But also for like internal workshops, even like if you're doing stuff, at your company and trying to like teach people, for instance, if you did Terraform, instead of having to start at the start, like if you bring your own laptop, by the way, you need to install this, you need to install that, this version because we're going to do this, etc., is basically just start up the Codespace dev container, and then let's start actually learning the tool or the thing that you're trying to do in the workshop. And you can like see the entire thing. I even talked to April Edwards about it when we were in Vienna together. Doing workshops, you used to be having computers because then getting like making all those ready, and then someone shows up and it's broken and they have to fix the computer. Now it's basically just bring your own laptop. Everything will solve itself because it's defined through dev containers and it will run in Codespaces, so you don't need to think about it. Just show up and start being part of the workshop.
Yes,
sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So Alan was saying that it's a great idea for education. However, it would need to be free because I'm guessing UK schools are quite tight with money.
So what you have is GitHub Schools, I think it's called, or GitHub Education, which has a lot of things included for free if you are part of an education program. And I really hope that GitHub is including Codespaces there. I'm not entirely sure yet, but I guess, or if they start doing that, I think they will see a lot of attraction, at least in schools. And that are the new startups, right? So if they start there, they might be getting more traction into Codespaces.
And it doesn't have to be completely free either. At least like some sort of like discounted rate.
Yeah.
I know like schools in Norway, we might be a little bit different than most other schools, but we literally buy laptops to every single student in the country. So
Nice.
like we have budgets for stuff like that. Codespaces won't cost that much, like, because it's not.
No, and if you go with a 2-core tier, it's 0.18. So if you go with the 2 cores, right, which is enough for basic work, then it's 0.18 an hour. It goes in automatic sleep mode if you're not using it. So what I always say is a developer is never working 8 hours a day, right? Because he's in meetings or other stuff, or so you're never 8 hours a day in your editor. So you will not pay 8 times 0.18. You only pay for the time that you're actually running it. So that's a different way of thinking about the cost. Well, the laptop that you have and that you need to buy, you buy for X amount, which now also is very high. And that's always on and always running, but might not be used for the power that it has. Well, if I give you an office laptop, which is way cheaper, and I then give you a Codespace, then we might be cheaper out in the long way.
Makes sense. Do you know how long it is until it goes into sleep mode? Is it like minutes or?
It's standard. It's half an hour, but you can tweak that and you can change that to whatever you like.
Yeah, nice. And we've got one question in the chat. I think this must be a friend of yours, potentially.
That might be.
Yeah. So yeah, apart from that one time on the train, have you tested it any other places?
Only on open source repos. So what I see a lot is that where we work, there's not really a lot of traction yet because some of them are not on GitHub yet. And the ones that are on GitHub are not on an enterprise plan, things like that. But I have access to Codespaces. So all the repos that I can use or can access, I can use Codespaces on. So I do a lot for Devops days. And that's a very big repo. So when I open up Devops days repo, I do that in a Codespace. And I do the changes there, just for me to get a feel with what can I do, what can I do, and stuff like that. And for every repo that I make, I try to make at least a dev container with it. And so that's how I use it right now.
Awesome. And one last question from me, because you just mentioned not everyone's on GitHub at the moment. So my question is, GitHub or Azure DevOps?
For me, absolutely GitHub. I use both, and it depends on the team, I think, where they are happy with. So when I worked in an enterprise, they were very happy with Azure DevOps, and were extremely happy with boards and how that all worked together and stuff like that. And I'm now at a startup where they are really happy with GitHub and the PR features there and with the GitHub actions and stuff like that. So it really much depends on the environment you're in, I think. I believe both work, and I see features in both of the systems, and I see also that they are more getting in tune with each other, as expected, right? They are now both owned by Microsoft. So I expect that in not too long you can do all the things in both of them. Just a little bit different, maybe, but still, it will be possible in both.
And the new issues are moving quickly, and it's not that difficult to see that it's starting to kind of try to get to some sort of like feature parity with what's happening in Azure DevOps. And just to say one thing there, we are setting up everything at Crayon and GitHub these days. We've been using Azure DevOps for a long time. The main problem with using Azure DevOps, from what I can see, is that it kind of makes everything closed source. If you are doing a new project, you need to invite people into that project.
Yeah.
You know, you can't really tell if what's going on. While in GitHub, we usually end up having internal repositories, so everyone that works at Crayon can look at what people are doing, and
Same here. Yep.
it's much more easier for us to like try to get that inner source mentality, so people can see how people solve certain issues and actually start working together. Because before, you know, we have a product. Do you know what's going on there? I have no clue, because you didn't have access. Like I can't go and tell what like I have an issue with this thing. I want to help. Can I help? No. I have to go through like 6 people to get approval to be, you know. It's really hard to do inner source in Azure DevOps by
Yep. Yeah. Or you need to have a certain amount of access that you can see everything. Then it would be possible. But most of the companies or the enterprises that I work at don't do that, because they are like, yeah, but you don't have, like, why do you need access there? You're not in the team. Why do you want to look there? Well, because of inner source. I know how to fix the bug that I have, and I want to help them. Yeah, no, that's not allowed. But if I'm in GitHub, sure, you can also do like writes there and RBAC there, but it's much more an inner source feature. And I see more and more, at least startups that I work at, like, but my devs already use GitHub at home. Why shouldn't we use GitHub as well? They already know the flow. They already know how it works. So just let's use GitHub.
Yeah,
and
that's the second.
You also, and if you also have a open source part of your organization, it's a no-brainer.
I get questions because I'm kind of in charge of GitHub. I get questions like, all right, do I need to create a user, like a Crayon user? I'm like, no, you have one identity on GitHub. It's your account.
But that's okay. So a little sidetrack, but that identity is also a bit like, I have now names in my environment that I really have no idea who that links to. And that's also a bit. So I see a lot of people that make a specific account for the company and also have their own user account, and they switch between them.
You can solve a lot of these issues using git config. You can have like entire, if you're like what I'm doing, and again, this is a little bit off topic, but since we're talking, I have a folder called dev, and then I have folders based on organization. So I have my name, that's my normal stuff, and then I have Crayon, and et cetera. And what you can do with git config is you can set specific email address, you can set specific signing key, et cetera, based on the folder name. So everything that goes into the Crayon one that gets signed with my GPG like key from, or PGP, depending on which way you want to do it, and everything like that. But also just people are so used to using GitHub that it's just so easy for us to just onboard them into our organization, and then here you go. Now you do your thing. You rarely get any questions. about anything.
Mm.
And I see Alan says that, yeah, you can deal with the inner source things by using Azure AD groups for all devs and et cetera, et cetera. The point being, in GitHub, you literally just say, have an internal repository. There you go. Like, there's nothing to set up. It's there by default.
Yeah. And with that, I think we should probably come to an end because Daniel looks like he might need to leave the building soon or something like that.
There was someone entering, yes, but it's fine, yeah.
Cool. So I don't think we got any more questions in the chat. None more from me. Any from you, Rob?
No, I'm happy with all this. It's really good, and thank you, Daniel, for going through this with us.
All right.
Cool. Right, and with that, I'll end the stream. And thanks again.
And do let me know on Twitter. Like, my DMs are open. If you have anything you want to ask or you want me to improve on or anything, shout at me, send me a DM, or anything. I would love to chat with you.
Awesome. Perfect. Right. Thanks everyone for watching. See you next time.
Thanks, y'all.